and the permanent representative. And now I give the floor to His Excellency Michel Xavier Biang, Chair of the Delegation of Gabon.
Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs.
Your Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Heads of Delegation, Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, Madam President, it is my pleasure to congratulate Madam President Maria Espinosa for her brilliant election to the presidency of the 73rd session of the General Assembly. I'm convinced that her personal qualities and in-depth knowledge of the United Nations are an essential asset that will lead to her efficiently conducting our work. Madam President, you can count on Gabon's support throughout the length of your mandate. I would also like to salute the remarkable work accomplished by your predecessor, Mr. Miroslav Lajcak, during his mandate as the president of the 72nd session of our General Assembly. I'm also pleased to salute the tireless efforts of Secretary General Antonio Guterres in promoting the values and ideals of our organizations. 1 month after the death of Kofi Annan, former Secretary General of the United Nations and recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize in 2001, I would like to pay a heartfelt tribute to this man, this illustrious man of conviction and of unity, whose commitment to peace and stability will remain forever engraved in our collective memory. Mr. President, making the United Nations relevant to all people, global leadership, and shared responsibilities for peaceful, equitable, and sustainable societies. This is a theme that provides us with an opportunity to assess our actions in light of our commitments and the numerous challenges of the present world. It is also an opportunity to find new ways of going forward in the framework of the 3 pillars of our collective action, which are promoting sustainable development, peace and security, and human rights for the well-being of all the peoples of the world. Making the United Nations an organization in the service of peaceful, equitable, and sustainable societies is a major challenge in a global context characterized by a variety of threats, and at a point in time where the values and ideals enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations are often severely put to the test. Despite the scope of these obstacles, I remain convinced that multilateralism is the ideal approach in order to build a global order that is more peaceful, more just, and more inclusive. In this regard, it is essential for our organization to become modernized and transformed and to obtain the necessary tools to provide adequate responses to the numerous and complex imperatives that we face today. That is why I welcome the reforms initiated by the Secretary General of the United Nations since the beginning of his mandate, reforms that seek to reposition our organization's architecture and tools and align them with its ambitions and the aspirations of all the peoples that comprise humankind. The people of the world, women in particular, require that we step up the rate of implementation of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, a vehicle of political, socio-economic progress that has a direct impact on the living standards of our populations. In this context, combating poverty must remain at the heart of our actions, while keeping in mind that poverty fuels extremists who, in their turn, fuel terrorist networks throughout the world. For Gabon, delivering on our commitments in terms of sustainable development remains linked to the international community's ability to mobilize the necessary financing, to establish innovative partnerships on the international level, and to promote technology transfer, in particular towards developing countries. Madam President, Gabon reiterates its commitment to do its utmost in order to implement the SDGs. We are firmly committed to a reform process that would speed up the diversification of our economy. What is required is moving from a natural resource-based economy to a model of production that is diversified and sustainable in order to resume sustained economic growth and promote inter alia youth employment, to combat social inequality, to promote gender equality and women's empowerment. These reforms, both structural and cyclical reforms, are primarily based on the Equal Opportunity Program launched 2 years ago by the President of the Republic of Gabon, His Excellency Ali Bongo Ondimba. This is a program that essentially seeks to move from a system of undue privilege to one of equality in order to ensure shared prosperity. Mr. President, making the United Nations an organization that stands at the service of peaceful societies also requires that the international community show more selflessness in combating terrorism and other transnational threats such as piracy and poaching. In this regard, Gabon welcomes the convening of the Conference on Combating the Finance of Terrorism held on April 26th and 25th in Paris this year. We hope that the outcome of this work will significantly contribute to strengthen international action against terrorism. Indeed, we remain concerned by the fact that in a number of regions in Africa, extremist groups such as Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab, while weakened, continue to sow terror and destruction. The same goes for Sahel, where jihadists are becoming more closely aligned with trafficking networks, and terrorist attacks continue to undermine development efforts of states in the regions. These facts clearly show the need to speed up capacity building on the national, regional, and sub-regional level in order to ensure that states have the means to effectively ensure their security. With predictable, adequate financing from the international community, Africa would undoubtedly better be able to provide an appropriate response to the security threats that weaken the continent. My delegation would like to take this opportunity to call for strengthening the capacity of regional forces such as the G5 Sahel and AMISOM. Likewise, it is important to strengthen our prevention strategies and mechanisms, in particular by attacking the root causes of these scourges. As you are aware, security measures are essential, but they are not enough to completely eradicate the activities of amorphous terrorist groups. Strengthening international cooperation is essential in this regard. The joint summit of heads of state and government of the ECOWAS and ECAS organizations on peace, security, stability, and combating terrorism and violent extremism, which was held on July 30th, 2018 in Lomé, stemmed from this need to join our efforts in order to effectively combat terrorism. Among other things, this summit allowed to bring together the positions of the Western and Central African regions and adopt a common approach to create the necessary conditions for a secure environment in the shared space of the two regions. My country remains resolutely determined to deliver on the commitments made during this summit while continuing the implementation of the Central African Strategy for combating terrorism and the proliferation of small arms and light weapons. Mr. President, international peace and security have always been one of the top priorities for Gabon. Hence, Gabon recently decided to maintain its contingent in the Central African Republic as part of MINUSCA. I am pleased to reaffirm my country's determination to continue delivering on its commitment and contribute to the efforts that seek to install lasting peace in this brotherly country. while emphasizing the need for a political solution on the basis of the Libreville roadmap signed on July 17, 2017. The Central African Republic and Central Africa in general are, despite the progress that has been made, still plagued by a number of security challenges and humanitarian challenges. This is why, in our efforts to find solutions to the various sources of instability that plague the region, our president has initiated a series of consultations with his peers, one that on July 2nd, 2018 led to a formal meeting of the heads of state and government of the Economic Community of Central African States on the margins of the African Union Summit in Nouakchott. In reiterating its support to our organization's efforts towards peace and security in Africa, my country particularly welcomes the efforts made by the Secretary General of the United Nations and his special envoy for relaunching the political process in Western Sahara. This political process is essential in more ways than one. It is a realistic one, and it accounts for the specific features of this region, which is plagued by terrorist threats. Gabon would also like to recall that the Moroccan Autonomy Initiative is the ideal framework in order to arrive at a compromise solution that would be acceptable for all parties. Indeed, this initiative is in conformity with international law and the United Nations Charter and is perfectly in line with the right to self-determination. The Security Council resolutions adopted since 2007 on this issue have clearly demonstrated this, including Resolution 2414 of April 27, 2018, which emphasized the need to work towards a realistic, pragmatic, lasting political solution based on compromise. Mr. President, the world is increasingly exposed to the deleterious effects of climate change. In the face of these alarming trends, our organization must once again step up its leadership role and make sure that the efforts that have been undertaken to date continue and are strengthened. Climate change is a reality that impacts our daily lives. An increase in temperatures, the melting of glaciers and ice caps, increase in natural disasters are undeniable signs of a growing climate imbalance. Transforming our modes of consumption and production, as well as the immediate implementation of the commitments made in Paris, are our moral, universal responsibility. In this, the President of the Republic of Gabon, as the coordinator of the Committee of Heads of State of Africa for Climate Change, has emphasized the urgency to act, not only for our country, but for Africa in general. It is in this spirit that in December 2017, Gabon provided a substantial financial contribution to operationalize the African Adaptation Initiative launched in 2015 in order to assist African countries to better plan, program, and implement climate adaptation measures. In the same spirit, together with the African Union and the UNDP, my country held a mobilization roundtable on September 24 at United Nations headquarters to support the African Adaptation Initiative. In this connection, we would like to reiterate here our support to our call to our bilateral and multilateral partners, including the private sector, to support us by financing measures that would increase our levels of adaptation and resilience to the effects of climate change. Mr. President, on December 10th and 11th, 2018, we will formally decide on the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration at the Intergovernmental Conference to be held in Marrakesh. The holistic approach that has underpinned the negotiation processes to date under the United Nations reflects the true hope that the world can achieve a consensus and meet the aspirations of present and future generations. Gabon, a land of hospitality, will participate in these important consultations as it is aware of the scope of the commitments that are to be made and the responsibilities that must be shouldered. To conclude, Mr. President, I would like to reiterate the crucial role of multilateralism in responding to the challenges that we must face and the needs of today's world. Our success will depend on the means that we make available to ourselves to bring the peoples of the world together. A stronger United Nations organization at the service of all, whose action is based on shared responsibility in favor of peaceful, equitable, and sustainable societies. This is not a dream. This is possible. It is within our reach. I thank you.
أشكر سعادة السيد ميشيل كزابير.
I would like to thank His Excellency Michel Xavier Biang, Chair of the Delegation of Gabon, and I give the floor to His Excellency Olof Skog, Chair of the Delegation of Sweden, to deliver his statement.